All right. Good evening, everyone. Apologies, had some permissions issues with Zoom, trying to get this going, but we'll get going here and appreciate all of you coming back for day 2. Hopefully come back for day 3. We'll see how it goes. If you haven't already, then you'd like to participate, you can go to the study group. The URL is there. It'll also be in the email that comes out. And this is kind of what it looks like. You can go and click there to join. It'll ask you for your email address, confirm it, and then it'll show you you're ready to go. You'll see a bunch of messages, and it'll be it's good. It was really good last year. All right. So one thing I want to mention, I know that the content is changing this year. Some things are getting moved around. I'm keeping the slides the same so they follow with the book. So it's not, we're going to cover all the information, but it will seem out of order from what ISC Squared is going to put out. All right. So what we're going to do, we're going to cover the cornerstone information security concepts, legal regulatory issues, security and third parties, ethics, governance, access control, risk analysis, and types of attackers. And again, this is not going to align with the current or the new, I should say, release coming out, but it's still covering all the information you'll need to pass the exam. All right, so Evan started it with a dad joke, so now I'm going to have to try and take him up or one-up him. All right, what do Alexander the Great and Winnie the Pooh have in common? Give you guys a couple of seconds here. Ha, their middle name. All right, sorry. All right, terms and definitions to memorize. Anything you see in the orange, you have got to know, you have got to have memorized. Oh, hang on. I had a message that the audio is not good. All right, so anything in orange you'll need to memorize. Maybe, here we go. CIA triad, you're gonna have to know this: confidentiality, integrity, availability. Think of it as a three-legged stool, right? And these are always competing as well. So confidentiality is preventing the unauthorized disclosure of the information. We're going to keep it secret, right? Integrity is making sure that it's not modified. So, a good way to remember integrity is you want your bank account, the integrity of that balance to be correct, right? You don't want to look at your bank account and not trust that the money is or the balance is correct. So integrity, and then availability. Hey, can I get to it when I need it? So memorize those and know those, like the back of your hand. So then when you look at identity, you have a subject and an object. And we're going to talk about this again in one of the later classes, but the subject is the active and the object is the passive. So the subject is going to be doing something and the object is what is being accessed. These, fundamental. You have to know this. There's just no other way. Again, so risk, know this definition: likelihood of something bad happening and the impact if it did. Now, we also like to add in there, sometimes what the cost would be, but that's not the official definition. So you have threats. So who's coming after you? The threat actor, right? The hackers, and the vulnerability, which is the weakness that they would be exploiting. Annualized loss expectancy, and you'll need to know all these acronyms and everything like that, because they will throw them in and interchange them. That's the cost of the loss due to a risk over a year. And we're going to go through and explain how to come up with or calculate all this, so don't worry about it right now. Safeguards, what are we doing to minimize or reduce that risk? total cost of ownership, how much is that safeguard costing? And then the return on an investment, what do you save by deploying that safeguard? You might see it as, yeah, the rosy. So, all right, definition of the information security. And we need to know this, so do not forget it. Information security is managing the risks to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information using administrative, physical, and technical controls. So when we talk about information security, it's not an IT issue. IT is part of it, but it is a business issue. So the CIA triad, you'll hear this a lot. Just know that it stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Yeah, so managing risks to the confidentiality, right? So we want to manage keeping that data protected, managing the integrity, making sure that we can trust the data, and then availability. Can I get to the data? So make sure you understand those concepts and you know it inside and out. There you go. So the opposite is DAD, and you will need to know that as well. Disclosure, alteration, destruction, literally the exact opposites. So disclosure, hey, it got out. Alteration, somebody messed with it. Destruction, it's gone, it's destroyed. It's no longer available. And yeah, the balance is critical. So like I said, three-legged stool, you want to make sure that you have a good balance. You want to have a solid foundation. You can't have two of the three and have a good security program. All right, so confidentiality, again, anything in orange, make sure you know. Confidentiality is preventing unauthorized access, disclosure, or read access. We're keeping it secret. And then it's only accessible to the people that have a need to know. So keep that in mind. We want to prevent unauthorized disclosure. There you go. Privacy, yes. So privacy lives within confidentiality, right? We're keeping that data private. Only the people that need to have it have it. So integrity, same thing we're going to talk through. It's making sure that we can trust the data. 4 types of data there: domain, entity, referential, user defined. We'll go through that. Don't worry about freaking out about it yet, but I think this is the start of the fire hose. We're going to start going through a lot of terms and things that you need, definitions and things that you need to memorize. So data integrity is the data. System integrity is the actual system running it, making sure that it's not been changed or modified. And then availability, making sure that it's available when you need it, right? It's pretty straightforward. And so that top line there, information security is about risk management. We cannot eliminate all risk, right? I think Evan said the only way you can really eliminate risk is fire everyone and shut down. No risk then. Not real business friendly, but you've eliminated the risk. So that not being a real option, we want to manage the risk. We want to minimize it. We want to understand what it is. So to determine that, we have to determine what our most important or critical assets are. So we're going to look at asset management, understanding what we have, right? We can't protect what you don't know. And then using those safeguards or controls to protect the assets. So you identify what your critical assets are, and then determine what the correct controls are to put in place to mitigate the risk. And then risk tolerance is the amount of risk you're willing to tolerate or accept. So, if you think about it from an FRSecure perspective, we don't have a generator because everything is in the cloud at our office. That's a risk that we could lose power and not have power at the office. We've accepted that risk because the likelihood, or I'm sorry, the impact of that happening is very, very low. Okay, so definition of privacy, very close to information security, but it's not the same, right? Privacy is managing the risk to the confidentiality. It's not worried about the other 2 legs of the stool. of personally identifiable information. So it's a little bit more prescriptive. And then but it does use those administrative, physical, and technical controls. So, okay, confidentiality, they're not separate, right? It does play in, privacy is a part of it, but it is not separate. So very important to keep that in mind. Yeah, just a little bit of a explanation here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time reading it. You guys can read that, and there's a site and visit it later. Okay, so IAAA or AAA, again, foundational, you're going to need to know this, right? Nothing more than a claim. Hey, here it is. I'm Brad, right? Or username is B9. It's non-descriptive, but often are. But without proof, you'll just have to take my word for it. I'm telling you, hey, I'm Brad. This is who I am. I'm declaring who I am. Then you have authentication. So then that's the proof, right? So identification is your username. Authentication is your password. So, or in this case, a PIN, excuse me, PIN, picture, biometric, whatever that might be. Again, remember, subjects are active, objects are passive. So again, subject is going to be the person taking it, action, and then objects are going to be what you're accessing. Yeah, so different factors, you got to consider what each of those things might be. So for authentication, you have the three types. And so what you'll see is it's something you know, that's your password, something you have, which could be the token or the authentication app, the code, or something you are, the biometrics. So when you use two or more, that's your two-factor, multi-factor. That's considered strong. Now, you'll get a lot of people that will say, well, we have multiple single factors. Is that okay? No, that's not considered strong. So make sure you understand strong authentication, multi-factor authentication is a combination of something you know, something you have, and something you are. And yes, NFA can be hacked. Here's a interesting read that's very, depressing if they're able to actually execute this in any sort of mass approach. All right, so identification, authentication, authorization, and accountability. So again, this is out of the book. You've got your username, that's your identification. Your password is your authentication. Hey, here's who I am, and here's how I'm proving to you this is who I am. And then you have authorization. So what is that? Well, it's what is the person allowed to do? Can they read, write, execute, modify, delete, whatever it might be? So these are your privileges, your rights, the permissions, all those types of things. So if you look, this is the order, right? We're going to identify ourselves. Here's who I am. Authenticate. Here's my proof. And then at that point, what am I authorized to access? So here's a little blurb from Evan here, really good article that he put together. Just kind of explains this a little bit more about identity and access management. What does this include? And so, right, identity management is the identity, I cannot talk. Identity, authentication, and accountability. Well, the IAM includes the accountability. So when you look at that, and just a visual representation, right? Hey, here's who I am, and then here's what I can actually do. There is the link, and again, you'll get this in the slide deck, so you'll be able to read this later. So because you have authorization, doesn't mean you should be able to do something, right? This is the principle of need to know. We'll go forward here. least privilege tied to rights, right? What can I do with it? And what can I do with and in the system? And then need to know is your information. So you're going to need to know the difference between those two, right? Least privilege is tied to rights. What can I do? Need to know is what can I actually see? What can I access? Yeah, violation of least privilege can violate the whole need to know principle, right? If yeah, administrator access is a good one. If somebody isn't supposed to have access to certain documents and they're administrator, well, you've just violated that need to know principle. All right, so subjects and objects, we're going to go through this a little bit, but again, very, very testable. You're going to have to know the difference. And one of the things they'll do is they'll throw very similar situations and where you have to determine what they're talking about, right? And so subject is the active entity, right? So this is the user logging in, any service is running, the application that's running, versus the object, passive, paper, database, files just sitting there, right? So the user is accessing a database. That's your subject and object. What gets confusing is the entity can be a subject in one and an object in another. It's really dependent on context. So you're going to have to make sure you understand the context of the question, right? So perhaps the application is a subject to access the database, but it's the object for the user accessing the application, right? So you're going to meet, and then they'll ask, a question around that to make sure you understand what context it is and that you understand the concepts. And this is going to come up repeatedly. And that's one of the nice things you'll see too, is as we get going through this, you're going to start seeing these same things start to come back, right? It's all repetition. So, and it all does tie together. All right, due care, due diligence. With this, it's what is reasonable, right? If you don't conduct a security risk assessment, is that reasonable this day and age, right? Can you make the logical risk-based decisions? Is not knowing what your most significant risk is reasonable? I would argue no, it's probably not. So no lawyer. We have worked with so many lawyers. Apologies to any lawyers that are out there. These are big deals, especially in the civil case, right? So when we look at this, it's really determining, were they defensible or were they negligent, right? And lawyers also do have a different sense of humor. I've done presentations for lawyers and told a joke or made jokes and it just falls completely flat. So yeah. All right, and they make money from by charging by the hour. And we're going to go through these a lot more as we go. So don't worry if you feel like I'm going fast. We will be covering these in more depth. So I wanted to put this in here. What are the changes in domain 1 for the 2021 update? So pretty much what we're seeing is a lot of rewording or cosmetic or cleaning up of bullet points that really shouldn't have any impact. 1.1 was moved from 1.5 to 1.1. And so I'll make sure I mention it when we get to it. But again, we're going to cover all the information on this. And then 1.6 was moved from domain 7. So we're not going to actually cover what is considered 1.6 now. We'll get to that down the road. All right, easy. Hope everybody is ready to go. Now the fun starts. But let's do another joke just to have a little bit of fun here. Where does the king keep his armies? And give you a second. It is Sleevy's. Get it? All right. Sorry. Okay. So you are going to need to know the difference between these different types. When we look at this, the 4 types, they're going to ask a question or have a scenario, and then the answers are going to be these four. Which one is it? So you need to know the difference between these. Civil law legal is different than civil law common law. And I know you're going, what in the heck is he talking about? Don't worry, we got this. So the civil law for legal, and again, you will need to know all this. Most common, codified with laws, right? Legislative branch creating laws and statutes. The judicial branch interprets it. No or very little weight is given to judicial precedent or outcomes. So here you can see all the different legal systems, where these are, what's being used. And it will be important to understand and know what country they're in and kind of take that into consideration, right? So you can see US is mainly common law versus Europe being mainly civil law, South America civil law. So don't stress too much about it, but you will need to know kind of those high levels. They're not going to ask you, a particular country, especially like, I would be surprised, I should say, they ask you a specific country in Africa. I just don't think you'll see that. You'll probably see something that you'll go, oh, okay, that makes sense. So common law, legal system in the US, right? Canada, UK, a lot of other things. It is similar to the civil law legal system. You still have your codified laws or statutes. You have your legislative branch creating those. However, a lot of weight is given to judicial precedent and outcomes from previous cases. Judicial, and judicial interpretations, the laws can change, right? We see that. That's what you'll see in, maybe in the Supreme Court or things like that. Most likely legal system to be referred to on the exam. If you're in, I would expect in the US. Not sure internationally what that would look like, to be honest, but I would definitely make sure you know the legal system of the country that you do reside in. So within common law, there are three types of law. You have civil, criminal, administrative. So common law is made up of these three pieces. Way to remember this: criminal law, victim is a society, right? This is, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That right there, that orange, criminal law within common law, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's intended to deter, right? So this is our criminal justice system. Think of this, I think that's pretty straightforward, right? Hey, you broke the law, you're going to jail. You broke the law, you're paying a fine. Civil law, so the victim is an individual, group, or an organization. So this would be, when, I feel that Evan has wronged me or done something wrong, and I sue him for damages, financial, right? And one that can be prosecuted both criminal and civil. I think O.J. Simpson, that was a great example where he was prosecuted under both criminal and civil. So remember, within civil law, you have three types of damages, and you will need to know the difference because they will say, what is the damage prescribed by the law or awarded to compensate or to punish? So statutory is, the law says, if this happens, you get this money. Compensatory, hey, think of that as something got destroyed. Well, I'm going to get damages to cover that loss. And then punitive is to make sure this doesn't happen again. So you can have compensatory and punitive damages. That's not uncommon, right? Hey, yeah, that you did this to destroy it, and we're going to punish you so you don't do this again. And then the difference here is preponderance of evidence. So tipping the scale, just that greater than 50%, right? So criminal, beyond a reasonable doubt; civil, preponderance of evidence. So think of that as just your standard lawsuits between entities. Administrative. So this is the laws by the government. You don't want to find yourself on the bad side of this. This is when, you know, they come in and HIPAA, the FDA, FTC, if they come in, if the OCR comes in because you had a breach and they find something and they penalize you, I mean, what is your recourse? What are you going to do? So administrative law, think government. All right. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Pause just for a second and let things get caught up and see if anybody in our moderators have anything to say. It looks pretty quiet. All right. All right. Keep going. Maybe. There we go. So you need to know liability. Who is held accountable? Whose fault is this, right? What this is, how you consider it or determine this is you apply that prudent man rule. Did the person or the business do anything or do what a reasonable person would do? And this is under due care and due diligence. So there's the actual definition. So due care, I think we cover that later. I'll make sure we get that covered. I think we cover it. I don't remember. So legal aspects of investigations. We really want to know that third bullet point. I mean, knowing the first two is important. However, it's really, really important to know what are the 5 types of evidence, what are they, and what do they mean, right? So what they'll do is throw out, what are the 5 types of evidence? And it'll be, relevant, authentic, accurate, complete, and, timely, or something like that, right? So they'll change one of them up. You need to know which one is the correct set. And I'll be honest, they're pretty good at making it look very similar. And if you don't pay attention, you're 75 questions in and hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever, you could easily not be or click the wrong one just because you're starting to get mentally fatigued. So make sure you really understand these and know this inside and out. All right, so from top down, this is the importance or the value of the evidence. Okay, real evidence is the best. It's tangible physical objects. Computer hard drive is the real evidence. The data is not. Okay, so it is. What do we have? The glove. Going back to the O.J. Simpson, that was real evidence. Direct evidence is the second. Testimony from a first-hand witness. Again, really what you want to remember is real evidence, tangible, physical. Right? Direct evidence, first-hand witness. So using one or more of the 5 senses. So I saw Evan do this, and I'm just picking on Evan today. Or I heard Evan say this. That would be direct evidence. That's the second best. Circumstantial, it establishes the circumstances. That's pretty straightforward. So, this would be, well, we've got all these different indicators, but nothing points to one thing or it is not directly linked, right? You can't really use this alone to prove a case, but you can use it to strengthen a case. So corroborative is strengthening a fact or element, additional support, but doesn't establish a fact on its own. Gosh, I just totally forgot what I was going to say about that. It'll come back to me in like 20 slides and I'll throw everybody off. Hearsay evidence, secondhand, it usually is inadmissible, right? Rule 802, you will need to know that. And there are exceptions. Rule 803, you will need to know that. And we're going to go over 803 here right now. So, inadmissibility of hearsay evidence defined in 802 in the rules of evidence, federal rules of evidence. So you will need to know what is the hearsay rule? How is it, what is it, where is it defined? 802. And then there's a lot of rules, 803, 804, that are exceptions. So business and computer generated records are considered to be hearsay. However, you can see what it actually says there. Really what it's saying is if these things are, if you regularly collect logs, review them, find something, well, that would be okay. If you're doing these things in the course of regular business, if you go back and do it just once and find something, that's not going to be admissible. That's going to be hearsay. But if you can prove it's part of the regular practice of the business to do whatever that activity is, it would be admissible. All right. So hearsay, always preserve the original, create a binary copy, investigate the copy. Never, you don't really, you just don't want to use the original and potentially corrupt that. So rule 1001, again, you'll need to know this, admissibility of binary disk and physical memory images, right? If the data is stored, computer, similar, printout, whatever, if it's shown to reflect the data accurately, is an original. So this is where if you make you would hash, get a hash of the drive or the data that you're going to be copying, and then a hash of the copy. And that's how you're going to prove that it's the same, right? I investigated on the same. When, so if you're doing any sort of investigation incident, and this will go over again later, always assume that this could go to court. Always assume you could be dealing with a lawyer. All right, so what are the legal aspects? 3 things. We're looking at the best evidence possible. That's what the courts want, right? So again, look at, there it is. Relevant, authentic, accurate, complete, and convincing. And direct evidence is the best. So if we go back, I'm going to slip back here, right? So you're looking at real or direct. Those 2 things are the best. Those are the things that you want. All right. And it always has to be, again, relevant. You don't want to introduce something that is not relevant to what you're working on. Authentic, so it's the original or a direct copy of the original. Accurate, obviously that's pretty straightforward. Complete and convincing. So secondary, it's very common in cases involving the computers, copies versus the originals, logs, things like that. Those are considered secondary. And then a chain of custody form, it just shows, and we've got an example here on the next one, but it's really showing where that evidence, what the chain of custody of the evidence was. I collected it, I handed it off to Ryan. Ryan handed it off to Evan. Evan put it in the locked closet. I took it out of the locked closet, right? Just give you an idea. And yeah, computer crimes and criminals is hard. So here is an example of a chain of custody. You can see that, you've got where it was submitted, case number, item number, and then you can see the chain of custody from, to, and a date, right? This is another one. You can see all the information. You want to have a good description of what the evidence was, who seized it, where was it, were there any witnesses, and then when did it get transferred? Pretty straightforward. Just make sure you understand it. All right, evidence integrity. Again, like I said, quality of the evidence will be challenged in court, or assume it will be. You know that the defense attorney or the prosecutor, whichever side you're on, is going to try and poke holes in the evidence, right? That if it's going to harm their case, they're going to try and do what they can to discredit it. Integrity of the evidence is critical in forensic investigations. you can't mess with that. If you compromise the integrity, it's not good evidence anymore. Checksums ensuring that there was no changes. So that's where that one-way hash. So with this, what you do is you run that algorithm, and we're going to cover all these later, and that's going to be super exciting for everybody. But you'll run this algorithm, and it comes out with a hash, a random grouping of characters. And so if you run the hash against the original and the copy, they should be the exact same. If they're different, it's not a direct copy. And yep, there's another one that's a pretty good article about the forensics. So if you want to read that, you'll be able to. All right. Fourth Amendment, this is the illegal or unreasonable search and seizure. Every single case, you have to know the court will determine if the evidence was obtained legally. So law enforcement needs that search warrant issued by a judge. So think of this as, hey, I can't just go and start going to someone's house because I think they have something, right? I need to prove it to a judge. The exceptions, and you will need to know the exceptions if it's in plain sight. So if you have, a gun on your dashboard and it's illegal to have a open carry or have a gun or whatever it might be, well, that's plain sight, right? In the public checkpoint, so those DUI checkpoints, I think would be a good one. Exigent circumstances. So this would be immediate threat to human life or evidence destruction. It could be that they got a tip, they go to talk to somebody, person slams the door, and maybe it's for talking about drugs. Slams the door, that person could go run and flush drugs. Well, they could be destroying that evidence. You would be able to do that, but you have to, again, prove it was exigent circumstances. And then it only applies to law enforcement and then those operating under the color of law. So that color of law is really, really important to understand. If you're doing an investigation and you end up working with law enforcement, if they say, hey, can you do this for me? Now you're operating under the color of law. You're working on behalf of law enforcement, which means I can't just go get things. I now need to have a search warrant. If law enforcement's not involved, search warrant is not required. So think of that as maybe a business investigating one of its employees. They could go and take whatever the business's information. They could take the user's computer. They could do whatever they needed. They don't need a search warrant. If the police suspect something, they would have to have a search warrant to collect that information. All right. So you'll need to know the difference between entrapment and enticement. And as we're going through this, a lot of people go, what? Why is this around information security? Well, it all ties into it, and as we go through this, you'll understand it. So entrapment is, hey, you get somebody to commit a crime that they weren't going to commit, that they had no intent to commit, and that is a valid legal defense. Enticement is, yeah, they were probably going to commit that crime, so you just made it easier for them, and that's not a valid defense. So I enticed somebody to do something, or I trapped them into doing something. So entrapment, no intent. Enticement, intent. Honeypots, they're a mess. I would very strongly recommend not using a honeypot or honey network or whatever you want to use. The only ones that I would even expect to do that would be, forensic investigators or reverse engineering malware, things like that. There's a lot of legal ramifications from that, and that's a really good article about it. But yeah, honeypots is basically setting up something, putting a web server open to the internet that's not patched and has a bunch of known vulnerabilities, and then watching the attackers and see what they do. All right, trademarks registered and just trademarked. So it's the creation of that distinguishing brand. So you've got down here with the shield would be, or I'm sorry, the security studio, VinDefense. This is actually now S2 vendor. I forgot to change that, but again, you can see these are registered, right? We went to the patent and trademark office and said, we want to be the ones that own this. You can't use it or without, we own it. Excuse me. Trademark freely by anyone. It's unregistered, right? So you might want to trademark something just to let people know, but there's not really there's no formalization behind it. Superscript SM is a service. So here you can see the registered trademark for Coke, right? Very recognizable. They want to protect that. And then creating the good. So that's the service. So then you have a service mark. Hopefully that makes sense. Patents. So now we're talking about intellectual property. Easy for you to say. So it is a legal monopoly to the patent holder making the invention public. So, this is where drug companies patent a new drug, right? But they can sell it for the first 20 years. They're the only ones that can profit off of it. It has to be novel and unique. You have to prove that. And then once that patent expires, invention can be produced and sold by anyone. So you go to the patent trademark office, say, hey, I've got this really cool new idea. You have to have it, listed out. They've got all kinds of requirements, but or I invented this new drug. I want to patent the formula so that I can sell it to people without and recoup all the R&D time and things like that. Again, usually for 20 years. Copyrights. This is more under software, right? You see that all the time. Copyright agreements that you have to click through that nobody actually reads. So limitations. There is fair sale and fair use. So if I purchase something, I can turn around and sell it to someone else. If I've purchased it legitimately, I've gone to the store, I bought a DVD, I could then turn around and sell that to someone. And then fair use is the duplication without the consent of the copyright holder. And when you're looking at this, maybe you would say you have some software or let's just use the DVD. You make a copy of that DVD and then put the original in a safe place and use the copy to watch. So if it gets damaged, you're not, excuse me, you're not out that software, computer program, movie, whatever it might be. The licenses is the contract between the consumer and the provider, right? So, hey, here's, and that's where it says the limitations on the use. What am I allowed to do with it? How am I allowed to use it? What am I allowed to do with it, right? Copyrights. There is this is important, that first one's important. Implied copyright on all artistic works. So if you create some art, it's implied that you own copyright on that. Now you can do a registered copyright with the Copyright Office. That is a different thing. So you would want to go and very similar process to your patent and trademark. Copyright is 70 years after the death of the author. So this is, the Disney rule, the Mickey Mouse rule, it keeps getting pushed because Disney keeps pushing to extend the copyright so they don't lose rights to, Mickey Mouse. Corporate copyright is 95 years after the first publication or 120 years after creation, whichever is first. So if you create intellectual property, but don't publish it, you own the copyright for 120 years. If you publish it, you get 95 years from the date of publish, assuming, whichever is the first. So trade secrets, this is a secret sauce, right? The recipe for Coke. Colonel Sanders, 11 herbs and spices and what they actually are, right? And what you'll see a lot of times is, it actively protected, very important, right? That's what it's saying. If somebody uses something, and you'll see the infringement, they'll go after them and say, hey, you can't do that, right? Because if you're not taking those steps to protect it, well, then is it really that important to you? So trade secret, again, big secret sauce and actively protected. As long as you're doing those things, and a lot of times you'll see in the stories where you're like, what? Why would they do that? Well, it's because they have to actively protect their secret sauce. All right, intellectual property attacks, piracy, copyright infringement. This is it's straightforward, right? The Pirate Bay, your BitTorrent, you're downloading rips, things like that. Cyber squatting and typo squatting. So cyber squatting is when you register a domain with no intent to use it for the business that you're trying to take it from, and maybe trying to get money from them. Or typo squatting, where it's where you might put in instead of it being Google, it's GOOGL.com, right? Or GRLR, whatever those typos would be. Counterfeiting, so making illegitimate copies, right? Making fakes. Usually you'd see, I think of that as being with money a lot of times. And then dilution, which is not an attack, but if you think about it, a Band-Aid is a Band-Aid, right? That was the brand name. Well, now you can go to the store and see 20 different brands, but does anybody call it by what those brands are? No, it's a Band-Aid, right? Same with Kleenex, it's tissue. But you say, a tissue, I need a Kleenex. So it's when, something becomes just, it's known by that, right? Googling something. It's another good one. No, I did that. No. There we go. So here you can see, some counterfeiting, probably not legit. Here's a example of that typo squatting. And then, theft of a trade secret. So here you can see proprietary source code. So this person stole the source code to give to China or sell to China. And so they had to go and actively defend that information. Here's another one. It's the same thing. You see this all the time, where they're going in and stealing data, intellectual property, confidential information. And yeah, there's a lot of that corporate or economic espionage going on. All right, looking at this, we're now with privacy. And again, this is a subset of information security. And it's, remember, only about the confidentiality of PII, that personally identifiable information. So what are some examples? Well, maybe a name or an email address, a social security number, the PHI, so your medical records, bank accounts, sort of. With this, it's PII is something that it makes you uniquely identified, or you can be, it shows, hey, this is who you are, right? It identifies you. Ton of different privacy laws. GDPR, I'm sure everybody's probably heard about. We'll go through these a little bit more. California's, although I think that one's going to get ready to be changed here before much longer. Medical database regulations, GDPR, we have a ton of them. You can read through those. You just need to know kind of the basic concepts. So this was what the European Union used to have, right? Very pro-privacy. You have to notify people, how am I getting your data and what am I using it for? You had to allow people for opt-out sharing with third parties. For the sensitive stuff, you couldn't just collect it. You had to get the person's approval, right? You had to check a box to allow them to collect that sensitive information. And the business had to have, quote, reasonable protection. So going back to that prudent man, are they doing the right things? Do they do risk assessments and pen tests and those types of things? What would be reasonable? No transmission out of the EU unless they have equal privacy protections. The US does not meet this standard. So they came up with the EU-US safe harbor to allow that transmission of data across between the US and European Union. Excuse me. Just got to note that my internet is unstable. So if it breaks up, one of the moderators just let me know. I cannot talk. All right. Effectively, it was replaced by GDPR in 2018. So what's GDPR? Well, it really goes a lot more. I don't know if it's testable. I haven't heard that it is. Doesn't matter. I'm not really sure. Probably it's not going to be bad to know. But again, I just don't know if it is testable at this time. I would expect, and I'll have to look through it, that it is going to be testable on the next release after May. So probably want to get to know this. When was it released? Effective May 25th, 2018. Understand the difference between controllers and processors. Controllers being the ones that own the data, processors being the one that process that data. So you might have a business that is using a service to process that data, right? So that's your controller is the business, the service they're using is the processor. And there's different rules and regulations around all those. 99 articles. I highly advise going to that link there and reading the summary. So again, I don't know if it's testable, but at this point, I would be surprised if it isn't very shortly. So I would probably look at getting to know that a little bit more. All right. So OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So with these, what's going to happen is they will give some examples and they'll ask which guideline or whatever it might be, whatever they call it, is it? So again, this is not a mandatory one, OECD, but they have 8 principles. I'm going to only collect what I need. I'm going to have good quality data. I'm only going to collect or use it for specific purposes, right? The use limitation. I'm going to have security safeguards in place, reasonable, right? Openness, I'm going to be open about what I'm doing, how I'm collecting it, all those things. Individual participation, making sure that with the opt-in, opt-out, those types of things, and then accountability, we're tracking this and who's doing what with the data. Really, you don't need to necessarily know the details behind these different principles. You just need to know if you have 8 principles that's not mandatory, it's the OECD. There you go. You can go and look at these if you're really interested. So EU safe harbor. US companies don't have EU compliant privacy practices. So it gives the US based organizations the benefit of authorized data sharing, right? Because remember, that's what it was. Voluntary consent to data privacy principles consistent with that. Again, replaced by GDPR. And GDPR does not have safe harbor as far as I remember. Okay, again, you're gonna need to know all these rules, all these laws. You'll have to know and be able to tell them apart. and know how to identify them. So HIPAA, make sure that it's not, you don't click the wrong one, the typoed one. They may do that. It's a very common mistake as well. So this is the Department of Health and Human Services, and then so that's overseeing. That's who writes it. The enforcement is by the Office for Civil Rights. So when you do that, if you have a breach, it's not the Department of Health and Human Services that's going to come in and audit you. It's the Office for Civil Rights. You've got 3 rules, important to know. You have a privacy, a security, and a breach or notification rule. Want to make sure you understand the difference between those. Typically, the one we really see a lot is more the security rule, right? That's how what are the controls we have in place to protect the integrity of that PHI. Breach notification rule defines like what the timelines are, what you have to do if you have a breach. This is also will apply to covered entities or business associates. So think of that as, maybe you have a doctor's office that has a contract with a transcription company, right? So they're sending recordings to transcription company. The covered entity would be that doctor's office. The oh my gosh, I am having a rough night. The other would be that their vendor would transcription. There you go. Would be a business associate. So you'll need to know these dates. They will test you on this. This is very testable. It was passed in 96. They're going to ask when was it passed, or could, I should say. When was the security rule finalized? Right? They might say what rule was finalized in 2003, or what came out in 2009. Well, it was a high tech. It was modified because technology had changed. And then omnibus rule in 2013. You will need to know what was passed on each date or when it was finalized. Security rule is the mandate for those administrative, physical, and technical safeguards. Hey, there's that phrase again. And a risk analysis is required. You have to do some sort of and we've seen this, holistic risk assessment, organizational risk assessment. You can't do a risk assessment only on, the medical side of it, but not consider finance and HR and accounting and IT and all the supporting back end unless they are completely segmented off, which isn't realistic. So make sure that risk analysis is holistic, covering the entire organization. All right. ECPA, Electronic Communications Privacy Act. This was the protection against warrantless wiretapping. It was really basically kind of gutted by the Patriot Act, which we're going to cover here in a second. So just know that Electronic Communications Privacy Act was protection against protection of electronics against warrantless wiretapping. So Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, you'll need to know this one. This is the one used to prosecute computer crimes. What's interesting here is, so it was in 1986. You can see the different updates, Patriot Act in 2002, and then the Identity Theft Enforcement Restitution Act 2008. So it's been 13 years since it's been updated. Have computers and technology changed at all? I'm gonna go with yes. Probably time to update this again. This is one where you see some concern from security researchers where they might be, prosecuted under this law that's outdated when they're doing, good work, ethical work. All right, so Patriot Act 2001, make sure you know that. It expanded law enforcement's electronic monitoring capabilities and search and seizure without immediate disclosure. It's really what you need to know. Graham-Leach-Bliley, with this one, financial institutions. So this one was came out of what was it, Enron, right? Making sure that we can trust and have integrity of the financial information. So Graham-Leach-Bliley Act really what you want. I don't think you'll need to know the specific enforcement agencies, but what you want to know is 1999, protection of confidentiality, integrity of consumer financial information. So if you see something around financial, it's probably going to be GLBA. All right. Whew. California Senate Bill, SB 1386. This is one of the first ones, the first data breach notification laws. It's how the personal information needs to be protected, how it could be used. Oh, I was wrong. Sarbanes-Oxley was the Enron one. So anyway, California State Senate Bill, you'll need to know SB 1386, first data breach notification laws. Again, you don't need to know what's in the bill or in the laws. You need to know what the intent of those were. And a lot of times you'll need to know dates or be at least familiar with them to be able to tell those differences apart. Yeah, Sarbanes-Oxley, I apologize, directly related to financial scandals for Enron, regulatory compliance standards for financial reporting, and yeah, you can face criminal penalties. You've seen that. And then was it Bernie Madoff just was in the news because he just passed away. So we can thank him for Sarbanes-Oxley. Whew. So excuse me, this site, phenomenal site to go if you have questions or want to know what the breach notification laws are for those specific states. You don't need to know this for the exam. This is just really helpful information. And again, you're going to get this, so don't worry about writing this down. But I mean, nobody can be an expert in all these, so it's really good to have a resource. Breach notification laws. Well, okay, we can see it's been climbing up, right? So we're good to go on that. So the problem we have is you have 50 different laws, right? There's no federal standard, no national standard. So now you have these conflicts where, well, is the data, is it the data where the data resides? Is it the where the person that the data is for resides? You have all these different conflicting definitions, jurisdictions, how people interpret it. So it's a mess. You hear about the Google and Apple and Microsoft pushing for a federal breach notification law and privacy law. Well, it's because they don't want to try and have to comply with 50 different regulations, right? Let's just make one and make sure that it's a solid one. That's why. And they also want to have a big input into writing it. Yeah, so data protection laws, 2 data protection, data destruction, data openness, and then freedom of information. So this is just a huge, it's a very tricky thing to go through. The safe harbor there, depending on the state, I know at one point, I believe it was Tennessee was saying, well, no, you don't get safe harbor even if you encrypt it. Okay, why am I going to spend the time, money, and effort to encrypt it if I don't? What's my benefit, right? I believe they went back on that one, but a lot of the states do say that if you can prove that it was encrypted, you'll have safe harbor. But key there being you have to prove that the data was encrypted. All right. Vendor risk management considerations. See, I got S2 vendor here. I missed it on that other one. Very disappointed. All right, so really it really should be considered third-party information security risk management, but a lot of people say vendor risk management, but it's really anything, any of your vendors. Think of this with the Target breach, right? Their HVAC vendor was their third party. That's how they got in. So how do you attest to the fact that your vendors are protecting your assets adequately? Well, this could be you send them up the risk assessment questionnaire, that's ours. If they have a SOC 2, type 1 is point in time, you have the controls in place. Type 2 is you've been doing those things for a set period of time, typically 6 or 12 months. ISO certification, very similar, very rigid. You have to get audited. It just shows that you had a third party come in and validate that you have controls in place. Now, high trust is another one. You got shared assessments, PCI, DSS, all those different things. So are you doing your due diligence to make sure that those vendors are protecting your assets, right? Do you have the right to do penetration testings or review penetration test reports that they've had done? Right? Can I audit you? Now, some of the bigger ones, probably not, but quite frankly, if they give me an ISO certification and it matches the scope of the services, I'm going to be happy with that. Again, procurement, acquisitions, divestitures. So really vendor risk management, third party risk management, and really attestation. How do you know that your vendors are properly protecting your assets, that they're doing the right thing? All right. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this one because this is incredibly important to know. You have to know it in order, and you have to know what they are. And so you've got the preamble, the canons, which are mandatory. You have to agree to them, and then the guidance, which is just the advisory. So the canons, and again, it's applied in order. If they'll say, they'll give you a scenario and then say which is the most correct. And you're like, they're all correct. Well, reason being, go with a higher one, right? So if they give you that, we'll talk to it. So protecting society, the Commonwealth, and the infrastructure. All right, that makes sense. We're going to do the right thing for security and protect. Act honorably, honestly, justly, responsibly, and legally. Okay, I can't be a black hat hacker. I can't lie about things. Responsible disclosure, and I have to act within the law. And that goes towards kind of the struggle that we have as in information security. We have laws and constraints that we have to abide by. The attackers don't, right? So keep that in mind. Provide diligent and competent service to principals. So to whoever you're working with or providing service to. So making sure that you're giving good quality service, and then advance and protect the profession. So again, when they ask the question, it'll be pretty clear in terms of that it's one of the canons. Is this a scenario maybe where maybe somebody isn't acting honorably and not providing diligent service, right? Hey, I've lied about what I can do. Well, in that case, diligent, competent service would be correct, but it also could be that act honorably, right? I lied about it with the honesty. So canons, you have to memorize these in order. You have to know. I mean, this is just important. You can't not know this. You have to know this inside out, backwards, forwards, no question. These, when you get to that, hopefully, again, like I said, they can have some kind of tricky questions, but as long as you know this, if you see one of those, take your time, reread it, take a deep breath, and understand, I got to go from the bottom up. Okay, does it hit this? Yes. All right. Does it hit advanced protect? Yes, it does that. Okay. Well, does it provide diligent and competent service? Yes. Okay. Does it talk about acting honorably, honestly? No. Okay. Well, it's and then does it protect society? No. All right. Well, let's provide diligent and competent. Or maybe it only does protect society. Whatever it is, you're just going to have to know these things. All right. 10 Commandments. I I never memorized them. I mean, sorry. I don't remember seeing this on my exam. It's in the books. Hope maybe this is one of the things that they'll clean up, but it's similar to what the canons for the CISSP. Right? And if you see the thou shalts on it, then that's your giveaway that it's the 10 commandments of computer ethics. It's the only one that's going to use thou shalt. So shalt not use a computer to harm other people. So I'm acting honorably and protecting the Commonwealth and all that. Not interfere with other people's computer work. I'm not going to snoop around. So I'm not going to steal, bear false witness. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because I, again, never memorized these. Copy or use proprietary software for which you do not pay, so I'm not going to pirate. Computer resources, hacking, Bitcoin mining, things like that. Appropriate other people's intellectual output. I'm not going to steal IP. Think about the social consequences and use a computer in a way that ensures consideration and respect for your fellow humans. Again, see thou shalt, 10 commandments. That's what I would know. I don't think you necessarily need to memorize. So here is where you can see this is the Internet Activities Board, ethics at the Internet, request for comment. So RFC 1087, published in 1987. The RFCs are, and like it says down there, if you have time, they're really interesting. They're just really cool to understand that history and kind of understand the thought process behind some of these things, right? And you'll see as we get going through this a little bit more that there's a lot of history of things that aren't technically relevant anymore, but I think they keep it in so that you understand how we got to where we're at, right? So RFCs are going to show you that. The unethical behavior, so seeking to gain unauthorized access, disrupting the intended use, wasting the resources, destroying the integrity of computer-based information, and compromising the privacy of users. And here you can see this, network working group, request for comment, 8, RFC1, format, what the format was. You can see, go through these and read them, but they're really interesting. I can't read that handwriting, but that's with the first table of contents handwritten there. All right. Whew. Hope everyone is hanging in there. This is probably one of the lighter classes, so buckle up. Policy is mandatory, high level, right? We want to define okay, let me go back. Policies have that 4 pieces there, right? What's the purpose? What's the scope? Okay, what is this policy accomplishing? What does it cover? What are the responsibilities? What are the users or whoever it is, what are they responsible for doing? And then how do we understand what compliance looks like? This is what we typically use for a policy deck. Try to keep it simple, but at the same time, you really have to have, there's a lot that goes into these. So policies are mandatory. You have to abide by what the policy says. And contrary to popular belief, policies are not meant to be read by everyone. Evan has a great analogy here. When you're playing a board game, does everybody read the entire rules, or does one person read them, know them, understand them, and the other people go and ask questions, right? Same thing. When you do this, with users, don't ask if they, when they do the acknowledgement, don't ask that you've read and understand the policies. It's more, I've received and acknowledged I'm responsible for complying with the policies. I know where they're at. I know where to go to look. I know who to ask for help if I have a question. But as a user, I don't need to know what's in a change control policy. That may not have any relevance to me. Why am I going to have to read it? Here, so FRSecure, we actually took the acceptable use policy, takes all the user-specific responsibilities out of the other policies into one, right? Makes it a lot easier for the users. Hey, I know if I have a question about what I'm supposed to be doing, I go to this policy. I only have one that I have to look for. Okay, so when you do that, you've got your policies at your high level, and then you've got your supporting documents. That's how I like to look at it. So here you can see on the right, there's a really good table. So your policy says, hey, high level, I need to protect the CIA of PII by hardening the operating system. That is mandatory, but you notice it's not prescriptive, right? It doesn't say how you have to protect it. It just says you have to protect it. Right? The procedures are, again, mandatory, and this is your step-by-step guidance. Procedure is, how am I going to do the activity that complies with the policy? And so build standards, those are the typical things that you would see. I'm sorry, build procedures. How do I do these things? The standard is, what are we using for it, right? In this case, we're going to have a hardening system or harden the system. Okay, so what am I going to do? I'm going to do the install the OS image. I'll download any updates, and then on and on. What am I doing that procedure on? Well, the standard is I am going to use a Nexus 6 laptop, or the standard might be the encryption AES 256, or the standard could be you have to use a certain OS, right? So the standards are the specific use. So again, policy, high level, procedures, step by step. How am I going to comply with the policy? The standards are going to be, what am I going to use from a technology perspective to comply with that policy? Guidelines, these are discretionary, right? It's recommendations. Hey, if you want, here is patch installation may be automated via the use of an installer script, meaning I don't have to go and manually download this. I could write a script, as long as it's getting downloaded and I can show that it's compliant with policy, that's fine. So they're giving it a little bit more wiggle room. And then the baseline is or benchmark, typically is discretionary, but it's making sure you have a uniform method. So just making sure that you know what the baseline, what am I going to compare against to see if there is anomalies? So what you want to know is really on this table, right? What is the policy? They will give you an example of a document that contains whatever. And then they'll say, what is this? Is it a policy, procedure, standard, guideline, or baseline? So you'll need to know the difference between these and kind of the order, knowing what's mandatory, what's discretionary. So again, guideline, I don't have to follow it, but maybe it's best practice and I recommend it. But if you don't want to follow it, don't follow it. Make your life harder. That's fine with me. All right. Whew. Switching gears, because we're not all over the place tonight. All right, access control, defensive categories and types. And Evan says this all the time. I agree with him. Information security isn't about information or security. It's about the people. So what are personnel security considerations? Are you doing security awareness and training? And these are two things. These are not one and the same. And it's important to understand that. Training is a specific skill. How do you spot a phishing email or a what are the things you need to look for? Awareness, maybe that would be the phishing exercise, or kind of reminders throughout. Hey, making sure that they're keeping these things that you trained them on up to date. So make sure you do understand the difference between training and awareness, right? Training is teaching, awareness is kind of the follow-up. Background checks, so there's a bunch of them: criminal, right? Driving records, credit, employment, whatever. What's important with background checks is the check that's being done commensurate with the role, right? So if you're hiring a driver, yeah, you probably want to get the driving records, because you don't want to hire somebody who's got 5 DUIs or has a bunch of accidents, right? But if you're hiring an accountant, is their driving record really important, or is their financial credit check, are they in a ton of debt, or would they be susceptible to blackmail, or getting paid off? Do they have a criminal history of doing that? So a lot more sensitive roles require more thorough checks, some one time, some ongoing. Just know the background check should be relevant and appropriate for the role. Termination, what's going to happen with that disciplinary process? And you do need to have this documented. Hey, it prevents lawsuits and puts you in a much more defensible position. Step one, step two, hey, the first time you do this, we identify it, we're going to put you on a performance improvement plan that gives you these rights. We're going to help you for the next 90 days and reevaluate, or whatever it might be. But you do want to have progressive, formalized disciplinary process. Things like, do you have an exit interview? How are you going to revoke their rights? Maybe if it's you're firing them and they're in a bad mood, you don't want them to have access anymore, right? And then just reviewing accounts, things like that, making sure that you're reducing that risk when an employee leaves. You don't want to leave that hole there. How do you deal with the vendors, contractors, and third parties? If you've got contract employees, are they falling under these same things? And then outsourcing and offshoring. Outsourcing would be, a vCISO, right? I'm going to hire somebody outside of my organization to provide that service. Offshoring would be sending it overseas or out of the country. A couple of things here, right? People didn't suffer when things go wrong. Nobody would care. And people are the most significant risk. I mean, technology, computers do what you tell them to do, right? I configure the firewall correctly, it's going to do what it needs to do. We have a saying, I'd rather go through your secretary than your firewall. People are busy. We're in a pandemic. Hey, people are working at home and distracted. They're not paying attention. It's a lot easier to take advantage of than a properly configured firewall and trying to brute force in. All right. Again, very, very testable. You need to know this. All right. Again, what that says is dead on. So you need to know the difference between administrative, technical, and physical controls. And as you see there, oops, I didn't click forward. Hey, that was in our definition, right? Hey, administrative, physical, and technical. So what they're going to do is you need to understand what the difference is. So administrative controls, this is your the documentation, right? The policies, the procedures, all those things that we talked about that define what's acceptable, what's not, how things need to be done, all that stuff. Technical is, think of that more as traditional IT, right? It's what computers, again, technical controls do we have in place to reduce risk? And then physical, so something you can touch, right? Locks, cameras, security guards. Now, and then you've got the different types. So preventative, meaning it was put in place to prevent something from happening. And I'll give some examples here in a second. Detective, meaning I'm gonna go back after the fact and see what happened. Corrective, I think that's pretty clear. What control am I doing to correct the problem there? Recovery, something bad happened. How am I going to recover from it? A deterrent, you want to maybe, hey, you don't want to do this, right? Offense would be a good deterrent. And then compensating, hey, yeah, we know this is an issue. We can't do exactly what that says, but here's what we're going to do to kind of mitigate or compensate for that. So what will happen is you will need to know the different categories and the different types. So you could have a technical physical control, a camera, right? And that could be preventative, could be detective, could be deterrent. So you're going to need to know, based on the scenario, what it is. And if you know the difference in the different types, it will be very clear. And I think, at least it was when I did it, that, oh, okay, that's what this is. So, maybe you have a security guard. Well, that could be preventative, right? I can't get through the security guard. Could be a deterrent. Well, I'm not going to break into that place. They've got a security guard. I'm going to go break into the one that doesn't. Okay. So make sure you memorize and understand the categories, where things fit into it, and then the types. Very, very important. And we will go through, as we go, there'll be some quizzes and at the end, we'll go through a bunch of test questions and kind of walk through our thought process. And we will definitely cover these because it is a really, really, really important piece. All right. So risk analysis. Yeah. So that is Evan's book, but I do agree. It's overused and misunderstood, right? So all decisions should be driven by risk, right? We really want to know, we want to make the right decision based on that risk. So, but unfortunately, most people don't assess risk well. So you have assets, that's what you're protecting. The threat is that bad actor. And then vulnerability is how is that going to be exploited. So technically the book says, and this is what you need to know, risk is the threat times the vulnerability. But I agree, it's the threat, the vulnerability, and the impact, right? Calculate all three of those. How big is the threat, nation state or script kiddie, right? What's the vulnerability? Well, they have to be physically on site to exploit it, or it's a remote code execution without authentication. And then for us, that impact, what happens if that happens, if the threat and the vulnerability occur, right? If the threat takes advantage of that vulnerability. So you'll need to make sure you understand what asset, threat, vulnerability is. You'll need to know the risk equals a threat times the vulnerability for the exam, but in the real world, it includes the impact. But I think Evan mentioned it the other day. There's the book info and things you can forget, and the real world, and they are not always the same. All right. Risk calculations, you have got to know these. Very, very testable. And oh my gosh, I think, well, I did the 250 question test. I had so many. I don't even know. I kept going, oh, come on, are you kidding me? So you are going to absolutely need to know all the acronyms and all the formulas. The risk analysis matrix here, I'll show you in a second, but the annualized loss expectancy is equal to the SLE down below, single loss, and ARO, annual rate of occurrence. So what does that mean? Well, single loss expectancy is Oh, and so yeah, then you get the single loss expectancy is the asset value times the exposure factor. So maybe it's a laptop that's $2,000 and it's whatever that exposure factor is that you determine. Well, okay, let's just say maybe it's 50%. Just as an example, keep this very simple. Well, our single loss expectancy is $1,000. Okay, so now what's my annualized loss expectancy? Well, it's $1,000 times how many times a year is that going to happen? How many times a year does a laptop get lost or stolen or destroyed? 5. Okay, so your annualized loss expectancy is $5,000. Okay, so you need to know this. You're going to have to know those formulas. They're going to give you a scenario, and they'll say, what is the ALE? And then it might give you the exact same scenario and ask you to calculate the SLE or whatever it may be. So pay very, very close attention to what the question is asking you. Don't assume anything. And then make sure you've got these formulas memorized. And this is real world. This is usable. So you're not wasting your time on this. So here's your risk matrix, right? What's the likelihood or the impact? And so likelihood is, yeah, this is definitely going to happen, down to very rare. And then what is the impact if it happens? There's no impact, or we're done. So think of this, a very easy example is maybe it's hurricanes, right? If you live in Florida, likelihood is will happen, right? I mean, it just, you got to figure out what the occurrence would be, but I would say you're going to have a hurricane. Are you going to have a hurricane in Minnesota? No, that's very rare. What happens if a hurricane were to hit you? I would consider that either major or a disaster, right? And part of that's going to be taking into consideration where you are. If you're, in Miami, maybe it's a disaster. If you're up, towards the upper central part of the state, not on the coast, maybe it's moderate or major, right? So you got to take those things into consideration and then determine what that risk is. Hopefully that makes sense, because it is important to understand and very, very usable in the real world. All right, qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative is a person making a call, right? Quantitative is numbers, quantity. That's the way I think that I remembered it. Quantitative is quantity, qualitative, quality. I think quality people, quantitative, quantity, numbers. Quantitative is less subjective. Qualitative is more subjective. And that's about what you'll need to know. You'll need to know the difference between the two. But beyond that, not a whole lot more. So many different risk assessments out there. NIST SP 830, 9-step process. I believe this is testable, so you'll need to know the 9 steps and the order they're in. So we need to, what is the system? We need to identify threats. We need to identify the vulnerabilities. What are we doing about those vulnerabilities, right? The control analysis is, what do we have in place to mitigate vulnerabilities? Likelihood of it happening, again, likelihood of a hurricane in Florida, way higher than in Minnesota. The impact if it happens, that determines our risk, which then drives our control recommendations and the result. So let's use this for that hurricane example. All right, we've got a data center in Florida. We've identified that hurricanes are a risk, and it's a disaster. Disaster if this happens. Well, what do we have in place now? The likelihood of this happening is, yeah, it's really happening. It's going to be high, and the impact, it's going to shut us down, right? We're going to lose everything due to flooding. Well, that's a disaster, right? That's your risk determination. So what control recommendations do you put in place? Well, maybe you have a hot site in, a geographically dispersed area, right? This is going to tie into a lot of the things we talk about later with business continuity and disaster recovery plans, things like that. But in that scenario, maybe I say, hey, controls, we should have a generator because there's a good chance we're going to lose power. We need to have a fuel contract in place, and we should really put the a hot site, a secondary data center that's replicated within whatever the acceptable loss is, somewhere geographically diverse that the same thing isn't going to impact both sets of data. And then you create all that, and that comes out with your results documentation. Give that to the business, and they say, we're not going to spend that money, or yes, do it. One of the things to remember in information security, it's not our job to tell the business what to do. It's our job to provide analysis and recommendations and options, and then implement the option that the business chooses. And it can be incredibly frustrating if you haven't been through that. And I'm sure you can only imagine you do all this work and then they're like, no, you know what? We're just going to accept the risk because we don't want to spend the money. All right. Okay. Well, that's your call. As long as you get it documented, you're in good shape. All right. So, types of attackers. Hackers, black hat, malicious. White hat is ethical. And gray hat, they say confused or identity crisis, but I mean, no, I don't think if you're gray hat, you're really more on the black hat side. So think, black hat hacker, those are the malicious attackers, nation states. Oh my gosh, I can't think of the Sobieski or whatever, those different groups. Think of APTs. White hat or ethical hacker is going to be, our penetration testers, our security researchers, people that are doing this to identify flaws and ethically disclose those to the organizations. Gray hat, well, maybe they do white hat for some things, but black hat for others, right? So maybe there's a particular company that they really don't like. Well, maybe they're a black hat for that, but then there's another company they really like. Well, they do white hat ethical hacking for them and just do responsible disclosure. So I know the difference between the three. Script kiddies, low skill. I mean, they're just basically clicking scripts that other people have done. Realistically, they're a threat, but they're not a significant threat to compared to the black hat hacker. Outsiders and insiders, right? You have to consider the threat of what the insider threat is. This is really important, financial data. Do you have somebody stealing data and selling it? Do you have somebody embezzling money? Or is it somebody outside the organization coming in and causing chaos? Hacktivists, anonymous, right? That's really the best description there. They're hacking for a purpose. Whether or not we agree with it, that's a different story. You'll need to know bots and botnets. Probably pretty familiar. So, just automated program. Botnets are a network of them. Phishers. So phishing is, email typically. Well, in this case, it would be email. Spear phishing is targeted phishing. Vishers is the voice. So a phone call, doing the social engineering over phone. Whalers or whaling is targeting executives, right, or high value targets. With that, think phishing, the way I like to explain it, and that's that Nigerian prince, right? Hey, everybody gets the thing, it's volume, right? They're hoping for a couple of clicks. Spear phishing could be maybe industry specific or, even really organization specific. So it's going to be a little bit more, it's going to be harder to determine that. Then whaling it takes the most amount of work on the back end, but also has the potential for the biggest payoff. So whaling could be targeting the finance comptroller and getting their information so you can change bank routing information and divert funds. Two truths. If you think you know what their motivation is, nope, you probably don't. And we get asked this all the time. Who did this? Honestly, I probably can't tell you. And in most cases, it's not worth it, right? A lot of these, if it occurred overseas, what's your retribution? You don't really have any, right? So just keep in mind, if you have an attack, you're probably just not going to know. A lot of times you'll see, signatures of specific APTs. So you can say, well, it looks like it's this one, but I can't prove it. And the amount of work it would take is going to cost you a lot, and there's really nothing you can do with it. All right. Woo! Got through it. Now, again, like I said, this is easily, in my opinion, one of the easier classes. So hopefully you kept up. Go in the study group, ask questions, read chapters 1 and 2. Come with questions Monday. We'll recap it, cover questions the next class. And great. Yay, I'm leading Monday. No, I'm just kidding. I left that in there. So I will be the instructor. So again, the way this is going to go is we'll go through a quick recap of what we covered tonight, do a quiz on this material, and then cover the new stuff. And that's going to be the format moving forward. So thank you all very much, and have a great evening, and talk to you Monday.